control that the live television transmission from the spacecraft that NASA managers had planned would not happen. While supporting the crew of Apollo 11, Bill shared a T-38 aircraft with his neighbor and Apollo 11 commander Neil Armstrong, flying to and from Houston with him when the need arose. He worked with Buzz Aldrin, helping to develop post-lunar landing procedures ahead of the historic Apollo 11 moon landing on July 20th, 1969. Later, Bill was asked to serve as lead CAPCOM for Apollo 14 by Commander Alan Shepard. But after being transferred to the unannounced backup crew for Apollo 16, along with Gerry Carr and Fred Haise, Bill never served as a CAPCOM again. As backup for Apollo 16, the three men were expected to serve as the prime crew for Apollo 19. But when budget cuts eliminated that mission, Bill was pulled from the Apollo 16 assignment and offered a spot on a future Skylab flight. After 3 years of intensive training, Bill and fellow Skylab 4 crewmates, Gerry Carr and Ed Gibson, lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center on November 16, 1973, ahead of a docking with Skylab. The three men spent the next 84 days orbiting Earth, completing 1,214 orbits, covering 34.5 million miles, all records at that time. The crew had the distinction of being the first to celebrate Thanksgiving in space. Bill performed 2 spacewalks totaling more than 13.5 hours, the first of which took place on that Thanksgiving day. And on Christmas Day, 1973, Bill and Gerry Carr set a new record for the longest spacewalk, spending just over 7 hours outside Skylab. The crew spent considerable time studying the sun, including 338 hours using the Apollo telescope mount, making solar observations. They captured some 75,000 telescopic images of our nearest star. They observed Comet Kohoutek and used handheld cameras to photograph the then recently discovered comet. They performed experiments aimed at identifying the long-term physiological effects of weightlessness on spacefaring astronauts. By the time the Skylab 4 mission concluded with splashdown on February 8, 1974, the crew had successfully completed 56 experiments, 26 science demonstrations, and 13 student investigations. Skylab 4 was the final mission of the Skylab program, and in 1979, America's first space station fell from orbit, having been visited by 3 three-man crews during its lifetime. As for Bill, he retired from the United States Air Force in 1975 and later left NASA. He continued working in the aerospace industry, first as a consultant before joining Boeing in support of the Space Station Freedom Project, which eventually became the International Space Station. Later in life, Bill moved to Florida and became a regular at the Kennedy Space Center, regaling visitors with stories from his space career while participating in KSC's Astronaut Encounter program. During his lifetime, Bill logged 7,200 hours of flight time, including 4,200 hours in jets and 2,017 hours in spaceflight. Sadly, Bill passed away on March 3rd, 2014, at the age of 84. For over 25 years now, crews have continuously occupied the International Space Station, due in no small part to the important work of Bill Pogue and all of his Skylab colleagues. Later astronauts, some of whom spent hundreds of days aboard the International Space Station, could do so because of the groundbreaking work of the Skylab astronauts. Bill Pogue and his Skylab colleagues truly were trailblazers among the stars. Thanks to all of them for their service. Shortly, the Pogue family and several of the participants in the effort to secure the display cabinets will join us here on stage to cut the ribbon on the new Pogue exhibit. Before that, though, we thought it would be fun to hear from some people that worked with Bill and people that knew Bill best. First, we'll hear from a man who flew to the moon aboard Apollo 16 and became the 9th person to walk on the moon. Here, Charlie Duke remembers Bill Pogue.
I think it was Bill Pogue was on, and Jack Klausma, and I think it was, gosh, I can't remember the commander. Anyway, the three of them, they were up there in Skylab, and they had an extension, and they said, well, we don't have any more underwear, and what do we do? And they said, well, Mission Control said, stand by. And so Mission Control came up a few minutes later and said, well, Jack, you changed with Ralph, and Ralph, you changed with whoever it was up there. So it was a big joke. They didn't do it. That was a funny story anyway.
So what did you think about Bill Pogue?
We're in the same group of astronauts together. We lived in the same neighborhood, and he was really a nice guy, yeah. And he was quiet, but very efficient, and so we were good friends. Everybody in our group was we sort of helped one another and melded in together. Yeah.
So well, and Bill Pogue's family is going to be at this event. So you have any special words for them?
Just that serving with Bill and the others in the astronaut office was very, very special to me, and I'll remember it to the day I die. And it developed some great friendships, great relationships, and great support on one another. And I remember everybody very vividly. Okay.
Next, let's hear from a man who would have shared a ride to the moon with Bill Pogue as Apollo 19 commander. Fred, do you have a story about Bill you'd like to share?
Hello, everybody. Like Charlie, I was in the original 19 group that John Young gave us that name, that joined NASA in 1966. I did not, other than the rookie training, we had scheduled 11 months on a program of so-called rookie training, and it got cut short, actually, at about 9 months. The intensity of the schedule and the requirements for warm bodies to cover different parts of the program going on at the time sort of suspended our training. So we didn't have a graduation ceremony like the recent group had. They split us off to work. I got shipped off to Jim McDivitt to worry about lunar modules, and Bill had mentioned to us he had a different assignment. And so other than the training program, where we run a lot of geology field trips, we're in meetings regularly and training kind of meetings, and visiting contractor plants and NASA centers. Beyond that, I didn't get much time with Bill because we were all split up. In fact, interestingly, people ask me, the astronaut corps, at least in the office we had, it was not near as close a group from a relation aspect as I had in military squadrons, where you were together every day in the ops room and flew together mostly in any squadron once a month with every pilot in his group. We were split up, like I said, these different things, and very seldom in the Houston office, because generally whatever you were working on wasn't in Houston. I was at Grumman in New York most of a year when I got assigned to that duty for Apollo 9. And so your ties really became as you were assigned to a mission assignment with the people that were involved, both the prime and backup crew, the support crew, and the training people that you worked with. And incidentally, none of that was in Houston. Generally, you were at the plant where the vehicles were being built. Then they were shipped to Kennedy, so you spent time in Kennedy. All our training simulators were in Kennedy Space Center, not in Houston where we lived. You were out on geology field trips. So very little time and very hard on families. And I don't know if that continued into Skylab days as well, but we didn't have much time at home back in Houston with the families. And same for many people on the program across the country who work in 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day forever. So the schedule was extremely high pressure at that time. I did get close to Bill and Gerry Carr. Gerry Carr actually I knew some of our kids were friends, and he lived not too far from me in the neighborhood I lived in. But we were assigned to the backup crew on Apollo 16 as mentioned. And so we were together every day, literally, in the simulators and in meetings. We were open, as I mentioned, looking forward to maybe flying 19. It's been a long cycle. Normal missions went 3 cycles. You train back up to 1, 3 missions later you would fly prime. Except in 13. We flew 2 missions ahead. A mission ahead, we originally would have flown 14. Al Shepard and Stewart, so they figured they needed a little more training time and not have a cycle before. So Jim Lovell volunteered to fly us early on 13. But we flew a mission earlier than we planned. But that was a good time, and I'm really excited about having a chance to be the last mission to land on the moon. Bill, I was envious of, obviously mentioned in the record, of getting to be a pilot in the Thunderbirds and have all that good flying, a lot of showbiz, but great flying. And it's kind of interestingly, he went to a different route to be a test pilot through the Brits. I was also through test pilot school, but with the Air Force School at Edwards. Most of us were in that group at that time. But anyway, I think Bill and I and others look at, we were very fortunate to have been around at that time. I always like saying I lived at a good time. The Apollo program and overall at that time was unique. It was really the only program that NASA's had overall through those days that had, I'll call it universally, the support from the President, through Congress, and for most of the public, not maybe all, but most of the public, for backing the program that is going to the moon. So I just feel very blessed. I'm sure Bill had to be around to take part in that program at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from a man who joined NASA in 1964 and went on to serve as flight director during the Apollo program, later becoming the Johnson Space Center director. Gerry Griffin. Gerry, please share a memory.
I mentioned I was in mission control, and my first view of Bill was in mission control. He was a Capcom. I remember he was kind of like the other guys, kind of like Fred and everybody else. Mostly test pilots that we had in those days. They were very crisp. Thought they were pretty good. They often could show humor, which they did a lot, which Bill did, but it was a very quiet humor. Man, was he a great Capcom. He kept the flight director. I was a flight director. He kept the flight director straight, and he would. But he was just really on the mark, everything he did. And at the time, I didn't know that he had been a Thunderbird pilot and done his test pilot training in Great Britain, but it showed throughout his career. And then right at the end of the Apollo program, I got summoned to Washington to work with became the head of legislative affairs for the agency. This was a Texas A&M aero major and trying to deal with Congress of the United States. Pretty tough. But it took me away from the operations of Skylab. But I got a good one at the end of it because Ted Moss was the senator from Utah that chaired our authorization committee, and he wanted to go to the Skylab recovery. So I got on an airplane with Senator Moss, and we headed to the West Coast and went out in the Pacific on a helicopter and landed on a LPH. For those of you in the Navy, that's landing platform helicopter, the helicopter landing platform. And we landed there, and then that's the ship that recovered the Skylab core. So I got to see Bill as they came off, literally, not very far, he came out and carried over to the carrier. Didn't get to talk to him right away because they'd been weightless for 84 days, and we kept him pretty horizontal for a while. But I did get to see Bill land, and I never will forget it. It's the only landing I ever saw in Apollo, and I worked on every mission. So I didn't get to see any launches either. I got to see the Skylab launch. So Bill will always be kind of chiseled in my brain because he's one of the 3 guys I ever saw get pulled out of the water and put on a ship. And he was a great guy and really good for flight operations at Johnson Space Center. Did a lot. Thank you.
Next, author Bill Moore, space writer who co-wrote Never Panic Early with Fred Haise, and who himself is a native of Oklahoma, has a memory of Bill that he wishes to share.
Thank you. As a historian, obviously it was an honor to interview Bill. Spent 2 or 3 hours at his house in Bentonville, Arkansas, and I had seen him. We talked various times at events like this, and what a great guy! Such a nice guy. Always, made his time available for you. And I remember one thing in particular. He told me that his dad worked in the Tulsa Douglas plant, and it's just right down here on the east side of the runway. And 20 years later, that plant was manned by both North American and the Douglas Space Division, and they were building, as was told earlier, a lot of components of that Saturn V and the Saturn 1B, which launched both Skylab and Bill Pogue into space. So I find historical full circle is amazing, and to think about what his dad would have, thought about that at the time he was working with. I love those historical things. But he was a great guy. Loved working with him. What a great Oklahoman, and really, really represented us well.
Thank you, Bill. Next, we're going to hear from people who knew Bill best. First, we're going to hear from Jim, Bill's brother, a school teacher and the 4th of 5 Pogue children.
Well, first off, I got to make a correction. He did not graduate from Oklahoma University. He graduated from Oklahoma State University. As a cowboy, I cannot let that go. Well, I was with Bill in England, and he was as a test pilot with the RAF. And I asked him once, what do you do when something goes wrong when you're flying? And he said, the best thing to do is nothing. Let the plane correct itself. And I thought, well, that's pretty good for a guy that I remember a little differently. And when he was younger, he didn't have that calm spirit as much as that would indicate. We had an uncle by the name of Carl. Uncle Carl was a radio operator in the Merchant Marine, been around the world several times. And I think he mentions in his book that there probably was an introduction to space because when Uncle Carl would come home, he would bring star charts. And we'd go out on a clear night in the front yard, and Uncle Carl would point out constellations in the sky. And Bill, now my younger brother Gerry and I would last about 5 minutes. And they would be out there for hours. But the main thing I remember about Uncle Carl was that his Bill's first pilot was a 1924 Dodge that he had bought for $50. It was the first car he had, and there's several. You know, of course, at the time that was in '46, and so we thought it was an ancient car. But of course, nowadays a 20-year-old car is not much. But anyhow, it was then. It had a feature that was pretty interesting in that there was a lever in the back seat that you could pull and disengage the muffler. And this was to give it better mileage when you were out on the road, you know, so you didn't have that back pressure on the engine. And so it was a lot of fun. We'd get out on the road, and then that was the first thing we'd do was flip that lever, and so we could get some noise going. But the other thing that happened was Uncle Carl was there one time, and the roof of the car wasn't full metal. It was I had a wooden frame that had a oil impregnated some kind of anyhow, it had deteriorated and it was leaking. And so Uncle Carl said, "Well, we can fix that." And Bill said, "Are you sure now?" Because it had a wooden frame, and that wooden frame was deteriorated. Well, when we started peeling it off, it just disintegrated. And what I remember, Bill just went bananas. We ruined the car, you know. It will never have a roof again. And I can remember my Uncle Carl in his mariner way, he'd say, "Steady, boy. Steady, boy." And they took a Copeland saw and just 1x2 wood and rebuilt the frame of that and put the roof back on it, and it was just as good as new. But Uncle Carl was just a really interesting individual. There's a lot of stories about him, but I can't tell them all.
Jim, I'm sorry about that mistake. As you could probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Oklahoma.
Well, I'm surprised you get corrected.
Next, we're going to hear from Bill's sister, the third of the 5 Pogue children, his sister Betty.
Well, to add to the